Are researchers hiding the truth?
Welcome to Answers News, Tuesday, May 27th, 2025.
In today's top story, researchers have found that humans and chimps aren't quite as closely related as we thought they were. So, I'm Roger Patterson, hosting today alongside Bryan Osborne and Avery Foley. And we're going to talk about this bombshell new research that overturns the claim that humans and chimps differ only by 1% when we compare their DNA. This is a very popular claim made by evolutionists that humans and chimps, which supposedly in their worldview share a common ancestor. Now, this often gets misstated as apes and humans are, since humans are apes in the evolutionary view and apes still exist today, how could we come from a common ancestor? But that's not the claim of the evolutionists. They say we share a common ancestor, not that we evolved from modern apes. So get that clear as we're talking through this. That's a key point we want to understand. But as a ministry and others working with us, we've heard this claim over and over and over. And regardless of what the percentage of DNA says, there's a key difference that we'll get to when we think about who people are. But this new study was released in the journal Nature, and it looks at a reworking of the framework for understanding the entire ape genome. In fact, that's the blasé title of the article that got released. And in the past, when they made these frameworks, they assumed that evolutionary relationship. So the chimp and ape DNA frameworks were based on what the human framework was. So it's like building the scaffolding for humans and knowing what that is, and then pretending, in the evolutionary view, the chimps just fit right over the top of that. So that's where we're parsing out some of these details today as we get to a new number. So after today, you can no longer say, even if you're an evolutionist, that chimps and humans are 1% to 2% different in their DNA.
And even if it was just the 1 or 2%, that would make a huge difference. I mean, you go to a zoo today, go visit the apes, go visit a chimp, go visit a gorilla, and you can tell there's a lot of difference between us and them. And so there's usually glass protecting you from them for a reason.
Big fence.
And also note, we are writing about them. We're researching this stuff about us and them because we're made in God's image. They don't write papers about us. We write papers about them because we were made very much differently from them. Yeah. We are made in God's image.
Mm-hmm. Now, for a long time, like Roger was saying, we've heard this claim over and over and over again. You'll see people wearing T-shirts that proclaim this, different museum exhibits. Even when Ken Ham and Bill Nye had their debate here at the Creation Museum back in 2014, and Bill Nye ended up writing a book, he quoted that statistic and was like, hey, this basically proves evolution right here. This article refers to it as an icon of evolution for a really long time, that humans and chimpanzees share this similarity. But creationist scientists have been doing their own research on this and have been saying for years that is not accurate. That only represents small parts of the genome. It does not represent the entire genome. And now when evolutionists are actually mapping out the entire genome, not using the human genome as a reference, but actually doing observational science and mapping out these genomes of these different ape species, what they're finding is actually that statistic isn't accurate. There are vast differences, genetically speaking, between humans, chimpanzees, and other apes, which isn't very shocking to us whatsoever. Just confirms what we'd expect.
Yeah, and that's why this fact check new complete chimp genome shows 14.9% difference from human genome. That's the
14.9 for the non-math people is a lot more than 1 to 2.
And
just
it
saying.
could even be higher than that. Yeah. So scientists within the young Earth community have been talking about this for a long time. Dr. Jeffrey Tompkins has done lots of research in this area, even using the old structure and the aligned sections. Basically, it says if we line up the chimp DNA with the human DNA, like you see in this image, we can tell the number of differences there. But remember, it was based on that false framework in the starting point, and they left out all the other stuff. They just looked at those aligned regions and ignored all the rest. And so the number was very, very, very small. So what Dr. Tompkins and others did is examined the whole genome, even the old version, and got those numbers in the 80 to 85% range that's being reported here. But there's even more issues with this.
But wait,
start
there's
to
more.
the numbers.
But when you talk about that number of 15%, I think that gets lost on us. That's at least 400 million differences in the DNA.
That's not that many.
I know, right? And just changing a few could be detrimental to the creature's health. And so this is a really big problem for the evolutionists. And it's interesting, the author of this article actually recognizes that as they are revealing this research, this should be huge news. This is changing a lot of what they should be thinking about evolution from 1 to 15%, yet they bury the lead in the article. They hardly even talk about it. It's like they're trying to
You have to
almost
dig into the
cover it up.
supplemental data to find the numbers.
They really do.
Yeah, so when you analyze the data like this, you can see the different ape species listed out here. Now, of course, they think humans are just hairless apes, but that's not where we have to land as biblical creationists, people who trust the Bible as the starting point. Now, they're working from an evolutionary starting point and building their framework. We're working from a biblical starting point to build our framework. Everybody has a bias. The question is, which is the best bias to be biased by? And the Bible gives us those solid answers. No matter what the numbers come out to be, we are clearly made in the image of God, and we're supposed to rule over the planet and have dominion over animals like the apes.
If you go to zoos like the local zoo here, the Cincinnati Zoo, there are often signs on these different ape exhibits just saying, hey, this is your family member. This is part of your family. Well, gorillas specifically, because that's one of the great apes that we have at the Cincinnati Zoo, the differences between the human genome and the gorilla genome were the maximum range, the upper estimate rather, was 27.3%. Like that's a massive amount of differences, and yet they would say we're closely related to gorillas. Humans are apes like them. So again, this is not consistent with the evolutionary worldview whatsoever. What they're finding isn't consistent, but it is exactly what we'd expect when we start with the history God has given us in His Word.
And it seems like they might be suppressing this a bit because there's not enough time, even with billions of years, to have this many changes in the DNA. And so they've got to reduce the time scale somehow. So I think they're not excited about this because of that. Also because, as we mentioned earlier, this is an icon of evolution. You take it away, you're taking one of the main pillars for arguing for evolution, and also credibility. Like if they're wrong about the 1%, that kind of undermines their credibility in the whole evolutionary argument.
Yeah, so now we have to be willing to confront when we see those numbers. Like, have you seen that recent study in Nature? It says more like 15 plus. And the other big omission here is they left out the sex chromosomes, the XY chromosomes, doing these studies. So we add those back in, we're going to get to a number that's much bigger than 15%.
Yeah.
All right, moving up to Canada, our neighbor to the north. A river of death, 8,000 dinosaur bones discovered at Canada's fossil mass grave. Now this is in Alberta, and there's a big floodplain area that they suppose came as the result of some catastrophic event.
A massive event still unknown is what the article says.
Wonder what that massive flood event could have been that buried all these bones, right? And they find a density of bones that's uncommon. Now, we find other massive bone beds like this in other places, but here we have a large number of Pachyrhinosaurian bones all together. Now, this didn't give us whether there's other bones in there as well, and we often find things like clams and stuff sorted in there. You go to the National Dinosaur Monument in Utah, and you'll see those things, clams, in the middle of all these dinosaur fossils. I wonder how those got mixed in.
You mean they don't hang out together on a normal basis?
Not on a daily basis.
Okay,
no.
yeah. But it's literally a direct quote. A massive event, still unknown, wiped out a whole herd of Pachyrhinosaurians in an instant, around 72 million years ago. Now,
Oh, that's the problem right there.
there it is. And what do we know? We know that a lot of things died very quickly. They would say from a flash flood a long time ago, but we know a lot of things died. They're buried there. That's what we do know. There are bones in the dirt. The questions are, how did they get there? When did that occur? And that's all based on your interpretations, based on your worldview and your bias. Again, wrong assumptions, wrong conclusions.
Now, if Pachyrhinosaurian doesn't bring to mind an immediate picture of a dinosaur, it's part of the Triceratops kind, the ceratopsin kind. So just kind of picture like Triceratops-looking creature. And I mean, the density is amazing. They've got an area about the size of a football field, and they've found 8,000 dinosaur bones so far, and they continue to find more.
No, wait. Is that an American football field or a Canadian football field?
It's a kilometer
because
of
those
land.
are very different. All right.
1 kilometer of land. They said it's one of the densest fossil sites in the world. So there was this massive herd of these dinosaurs going along, and in their view, they say that there's the site has shown swirls of sediment from fast-flowing water. And then they're like, I guess this means there must have been some massive flash flood that just came raging over the mountains, and the dinosaurs couldn't get away because there was too many of them, and so they were just quickly buried. Well, if they're not sure what the massive event still unknown is, the Bible has an eyewitness account of a massive swirl of sediment from fast-flowing water that would have occurred during the global flood of Noah's day just a few thousand years ago.
And we find massive fossil graveyards literally all around the world, many of them containing millions of fossils, some of them billions of fossils in huge, massive graveyards, which just screams a global flood.
Yeah, and so when we think about the uniformitarian framework of thinking that the evolutionists would use, slow and gradual processes over millions of years, they allow catastrophic events in localized areas, but they would reject anything like the catastrophic flood of Noah's day that we read in the Bible covered the entire globe. Okay? It was a worldwide global event, and as a result of that, we see these massive burials. So we would suggest that the flood of Noah's day gives a much more consistent explanation for these massive graveyards that we find all over the world. Mm-hmm. All right, our next one takes us to a cultural issue. Well, let's jump back to our resources there for just a second. If you want to know more about these things, like fossils and floods, this book, Glass House, has a lot of great resources dealing with those things. And the title comes from the idea that the evolutionary worldview is really a glass house that's easily shattered when we start poking at some of those ideas and details.
It does a lot of those supposed icons of evolution, as mentioned in the first article. So yeah, great book.
All right, on to this culture issue article then. Website linked to suspect in California IVF clinic bombing declared war against pro-lifers. So they believe they have the correct suspect, and he was actually in the car when the bomb detonated and died in that. And so as they've researched and looked at the websites and details he's left behind, kind of his manifesto as it were, he writes in very interesting ways that he doesn't want people to be alive on the earth. People are a scourge on the earth. So he's a pro-mortalist. And that was a new word for us thinking about those things. We've heard of anti-natalists who want to limit the birth number, but here's somebody who's truly in this category of let's get rid of people, they're a scourge on the planet.
I thought it was interesting as I was reading through this, and he's talking about that we need to have a war against pro-lifers, but where he decided to have his big moment and end his life while trying to, move towards his cause of pro-mortalism, he picked an IVF clinic. And what's interesting about that is that IVF clinics already, they're not pro-life in the sense that they don't value the life of every single individual, because IVF clinics, reproductive technology as a whole, discard thousands and thousands and thousands of embryos. When these embryos are created, and this clinic specifically does genetic testing. So what that means is they're sorting the embryos based on their genetics and saying, these ones are more likely to survive, these ones have better genetics, these ones are less likely to have some kind of developmental disability or maybe develop some disease down the road or something like that. So we will allow those ones to be implanted, and then these other ones that maybe don't have as good genetics based on the testing that they do, which of course is not 100% accurate, we're going to discard those ones and get rid of those ones. So at these clinics, there's already thousands and thousands and thousands of babies every single day who are being thrown away and discarded. So it's just interesting the spot that he picked for this, because it's not really a pro-life space. It's a space that's ending the lives of countless embryos who are made in the image of God, people's children, grandchildren, siblings, simply because they're not considered to be as valuable because they're so tiny and helpless, and they're just not given the same treatment that other people are who have already been born.
And it's really kind of sad. You look at this, he's a young man who's 25 years old, basically a kid. I'm 48, I can say that, right? So, but 25 years old, young man, and being a pro-mortalist, he thinks life is basically a cancer on the planet. And really, he's buying into a popular narrative in our culture today that humans are a blight on this planet, that we should not have evolved into existence. We're actually causing the death of the earth. We're causing climate change. We're ruining the world. And of course, these recent generations have been fed this indoctrination for a long time now that you are the cause of the problem. We need to get rid of humans so the earth can flourish again. Where the Bible says, no, humanity's job is to make the world flourish to the glory of God and the good of mankind. But he has definitely a non-biblical worldview. You go to his website he set up, it has links to Satanism, hostility towards Christianity, towards pro-life views. He actually says that death is preferable to life. And in another website, another article, it said on one of his websites that he said that no one consulted him about allowing him to be born. Like someone took away his right to make a decision, which how could you do that anyway? But he's just mad that he didn't give his consent to be born. Yeah. But and anyway,
that's totally contradictory to his broader worldview, this evolutionary worldview. How can we say that humans came into existence through these natural evolutionary processes?
That's right.
And then humans are now a blight on the planet. Aren't we
Somehow
just
we're
part of
morally
the planet?
responsible for our actions
Yeah.
when we're just the result of millions of years of evolution, and there's no such thing as a conscience, and there's no such thing as right or wrong. It's
So
completely
many
inconsistent.
inconsistencies.
And he's making so many more arguments as you go through his comments about why we should do this. But again, if there is no God, then there are no absolutes. There is no morality. It's just your opinion. And why are you trying to force your opinion on me? That's bigoted, hateful, and intolerant. I'm canceled or I'm triggered and you're canceled.
Yeah,
right?
there's much anti-God, anti-biblical language in here. He talks about you're going to burn in hell for this, but that doesn't exist in his worldview, so how does that make sense? Your God definitely doesn't exist, but if he did, I'd choose Satan over your evil God. Did you ever think that maybe the Bible is just slander against Satan and that Satan realized what a creep your God is? Okay, that's
Sounds like Satan wrote
Satanist.
that.
Yeah, that's a satanic, if you think of the worldview of Satanism, which often is atheistic, truly, he's blending all these ideas and it's a hodgepodge. And we can't help but feel compassion for someone like this because we know back in that perfect creation, Adam sinned. Adam chose to rebel against God, and that brought this death and corruption into the world, including wrong ways of thinking. And it's our goal as ambassadors of Christ not to tear down the people, but to tear down those arguments and show them the hope that they can have as image bearers of Christ.
To show
of God
people like
in
this
Christ,
who have a worldview that leads to death that God is real, and Christ offers a solution to the hopelessness that this young man clearly felt and the hatred that was in his heart towards others. And thankfully, the Lord was gracious, and there were 4 people injured in the attack, and he was killed, but none of the people who work at the clinic and none of the embryos were killed. So this could have been a mass casualty event if those embryos had been killed, but thankfully, they were preserved.
And I would simply add this just very quickly. You might say to yourself, but I don't know a Satanist who wants to blow up a building. Well, maybe you don't, and that's a good thing, all right? But you probably know someone who's bought the ideas of our culture today. They're buying into the lies, and therefore they feel depressed, they feel anxiety, they feel like the weight of the world's on their shoulders, that the world's falling apart because of them and humanity. They're looking for hope, they're looking for answers, and within the Christian worldview, we have them. So be prepared to engage them, love them, share the truth with them about God's word, about who we are, and the real purpose of our life in this planet.
Absolutely. On to another article from Evolution News. We have a professor here, Yuval Noah Harari, saying Darwin is the prophet. The prophet of what, you may ask? Darwin is the prophet of sexual liberation.
Didn't see that coming until I read it. I'm like, okay, I see how you got there, but
the worldview Darwin set up says there's no God, there's no morality, we're simply people. And not just in his book, Origin of Species, but in his book, The Descent of Man, which we would argue is the real racist attitudes that Darwin expressed.
And sexist.
Then they got carried out, and when we apply those things to our thinking and our world around us, we take a false worldview and we apply it to the world, we're going to get these types of results.
And this same guy said, nothing in nature has a purpose, and nothing that exists is unnatural. So everything's okay that happens in nature. So what about rape, cannibalism, murder? Is that okay too? And so he can't consistently apply, because I bet he'd push back and say, no, I don't agree with rape. That's wrong. But why?
This is probably going to wind up on a Hallmark card around next Valentine's Day, right? I don't think so.
Yeah, he wrote in this video, he said, in biology, there are no purposes. Nothing has any purpose in biology. In biology, there are only causes, which kind of harkens back to the last article, right? If there is no purpose, if biology is just all that exists and we're just here because of millions of years of evolution, then yeah, there is no hope. Nothing has a purpose. We have no purpose. There's no reason we're here. There's no future. Just everything is going to go extinct someday. Woohoo. Yeah. Like that's what the evolutionary worldview leads to. And so this other guy, even though his worldview is kind of convoluted and chaotic, he's being more consistent with his worldview because he's going to the natural outcome of that. The same as this guy here, him saying, hey, nothing that exists is unnatural. He said this in honor of the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. So he was specifically applying this in the LGBTQ space.
Yeah, now don't be deceived. This is cloaked as science and research and all of these things, but it's really just a religious philosophy that's being foisted on those people who are willing to accept it. And it's not new. Okay? There's nothing new under the sun. We go back, we read what Paul was dealing with as he was writing his letter to the Romans, that progression that we see in Romans 1. that is the state of man apart from God. God's word needs to be our authority and our guide when it comes to these issues.
And connected to that, speaking of someone being a prophet by what they wrote or what they thought, C.S. Lewis, in a sense, was prophetic about how things turn out when you reject God's word and our identity found in God's word as image bearers. C.S. Lewis had a book called The Abolition of Man. And in that book, it's a very short book, but it's a good read. I don't agree with everything that C.S. Lewis said, but this one has some good stuff in it. He basically argued that here's how it'll unfold in our culture, that man will conquer nature. In other words, he will demystify it. He will understand it. He will take away the divine away from it. He'll explain it with only natural processes. So man will conquer nature. And then what will happen is man will then equate himself to the natural world. He's just part of nature. That's all he is. And when he does that, the next step is man then conquers man, because now we can demystify man. We're not made in God's image. We're just apes. We're rearranged pond scum. Therefore, we understand ourselves, just connected to nature. That's all we are. And once you do that, there's no God to govern you or to guide you. Then what directs your life? Your natural impulses. Therefore, nature conquers man, and you're guided by your instincts, which lead you very much astray to horrific things. That's exactly what he's talking about right here.
Yeah, and as he's celebrating these sexual deviancies, he's actually undermining his own position again, because how do those lead to production of new life that can then carry on those traits?
That's right.
They don't. Okay, they're destructive to life. All right, next we have a related article, Why Lesbians Want Out of the LGBT Movement, coming from a journal called The Spectator. And this lady, Julie Bindel, is a lesbian activist and feminist, and a historian, I believe, was the role she plays as a professor and teacher. So in 1977, she came out as a lesbian and decided that she would join ranks with other people, and there was a lot of, as the movements were coalescing back then, they said, hey, let's work together. So the gay men and the lesbian women and others started to join forces because they saw a common cause there. But she's also a feminist, as many lesbians are, and their role is to exalt women. And she found out that eventually the role of women was actually getting squashed, and the women were actually being ostracized, even in these very progressive circles. And that's created some consternation for her over the years, and she's finally willing to speak out about a radical way to resolve that in their movement.
Yeah, she actually says that the LGBTQ plus acronym has expanded in recent years to be more inclusive. Many lesbians like herself have come to feel less and less included, as the umbrella term takes in all manner of sexual and gender identities, most of which have absolutely nothing to do with same-sex attraction like her. The result is lesbians are sidelined. And so basically, if you don't know what a woman is, how can there actually be a lesbian? If you don't know what a man is, how can there actually be someone who is homosexual from a man's perspective? So you have to be able to define gender to have these actual identities, and they're actually losing out on that. And then also she feels like that the transgender movement is co-opting, or the transgender people are co-opting the entire movement just to really force their rhetoric and their ideology. That's leaving the people like her on the sidelines.
She says that she was talking about the sexism that she was fighting back in the 70s and 80s as this movement was getting started. And she said, sexism has reared its ugly head again, this time under the guise of transgender inclusion. She said, lesbians have been scorned and treated badly. We've been accused of bigotry and hatred because we don't want to share female-only spaces with biological males.
Wait, they were accused of bigotry and hatred? I wonder how that feels. Oh, wait, I'm a Christian. I know. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Right? So this whole article, she's talking about how they need to have a breakup, an LGBT breakup between the lesbians and the gay men and transgender, because it doesn't work together.
This would be a terrible
Like you were
movie.
saying, if you can't define what a woman is and you can't define what a man is, how does any of this work? But she's inconsistent, because as she's writing this article, and she even says like so-called trans women, like using kind of that phrase to say like, they're not really women, which they aren't. She goes on to say, we have nothing against trans-identified individuals, but it is high time to recognize that gay men, lesbians, and transgender people are different. So she kind of wants to have her cake and eat it too. She wants
wait
to
a minute,
be like,
which one is it?
Right, which one is it? Either trans women are women, like the slogans say, or trans women are men dressed as women. Like, it's one or the other. You have to choose. But she kind of wants to be like, yeah, I'm okay with the transgender stuff. Just don't let the males come into the female spaces and stop being sexist towards women. And women do exist. But if you can't define what a woman is and a man can just be a woman because he says he's a woman, then the whole thing just falls apart. It doesn't make sense. You have, and this again, this is where the biblical worldview comes in and says, no, God created us male and female. And God created marriage to be between one man and one woman. We have all of these problems because we're sinners. These problems only exist because of sin. When we go back to the simplicity of the biblical worldview, it's totally different than the chaos that's created within the LGBTQIA plus community that's now fracturing and breaking apart because it's not being held together by anything cohesive, which would be the authority of the Word of God.
There are other groups like Gays Against Groomers who try to expose how many in the trans community are grooming minors into these things, but their sexuality is still offensive to God. God has said those things are not what he allows. They're not good in his eyes, and he's going to judge them as sin. Again, the hope is we can point these people to the gospel. It is the one that the real change of heart that can come. Not just a breakup between the lesbians and the gays, but turning to Christ and trusting in him.
Absolutely.
We've got another book over there Avery's got in front of her. That deals
The
with
author
these
of this
issues.
book is a really good author, isn't he, Brian?
I think he's sketchy. I don't know.
This is Brian's book.
Yeah.
Quick Answers to Social Issues. I always recommend this one for middle school and up. Excellent, excellent book, looking at some of these more social issues. How do we deal with these issues regarding equality, sex, gender, sanctity of life, all of that from a biblical worldview perspective. So, encourage you to check out Quick Answers to Social
2
Issues.
thumbs up.
And now, if you want to know where your teeth came from,
I have always wondered, where did my sensitive teeth come from?
our teeth evolved from fish body armor over 460 million years ago.
There you go.
Discover. Thinking about the framework here, now you think they've done some genetic studies and aligned these things together, but no, they looked at these fossils of these primitive organisms, that they would call them. We trust they're fully formed by God. And they've decided that these little networks where we have pores and we have dentin forming in these pores that we see in this ancient fish-like creature, which then they decide wasn't really a fish. We see those things in modern crustaceans like crabs and things. And we see in our bodies these little pockets that produce dentin, and that's one of the layers in our teeth right there underneath the enamel. And that is how we evolved. So they've got this set of genes, and that set of genes got rearranged and co-opted to make these sensors in crustaceans, and then in our teeth, that's how they formed, and that's why we have sensitive teeth. So we can't just chow down on as much ice cream as we want to as fast as we can. It's evolution's fault.
Totally simple to take genes that code for the production of these internal tubules producing these, scales and turn it into teeth that you use in your mouth for chewing. Totally not hard at all. And what I thought was interesting is they're talking 460 million years here. Like, you're getting up to 500 million years. That's a lot of years. And they're saying the reason our teeth are sensitive is because they evolved from sensory tissue. So they totally changed. The structure of them changed. The purpose of them changed. They're coated now in enamel. There's all these things that are different about them in 460 million years. But the sensitivity stayed the same. That part stayed the same. But everything else changed. It's like, come on. That's just silly.
Well, and I'll read a line here. It says, ancient vertebrates like fish and ancient arthropods were making the same mineralized tissue to help them with their sense of their environment. Eventually, that mineralized tissue evolved into dentin and into our sensitive teeth.
Cool story, bro.
So it just tells a story. My question is, how exactly did that happen?
Right.
Over, again, almost 500 million years, not only physically, but also genetically.
Yeah.
So they used to assert it to be a fact. And
Just
then say,
wave your hand
it
and
just
make
happened.
it so.
It's a fairy tale. But I think, honestly, and I threw the papers because I do think it's a pretty outlandish claim. We know it is biblically. And it can seem superficially to be, a very dumb argument, but it's really not. It's wrong because of their worldview. And the last paragraph says this: viewed through this evolutionary lens,
There's the key.
we can now
right
explain
there.
the mystery of sensitive teeth. And that's the key. It's not that they're dumb, they're smart. The people making these arguments are brilliant people, especially in their particular field of studies. They're not dumb, but it's their evolutionary lens. It's their worldview that gives them the wrong interpretations that leads to really wrong conclusions, like your teeth came from fish scales or armor 500 million years ago.
Hey, you got to connect with your inner fish and understand all those things.
If Rob was here, he'd say that smells fishy, but he's not here.
It does.
So There you go.
All right, that's all the news we've got for you today, but we want to point you to some resources coming up next year. We had our first Answers for Men conference this year. Now, next year, we've got this scheduled. You can see Brian's going to be one of the speakers there, as many others, Chuck Black and Barry Wilmore, the astronaut, Faith on Fire. So check that out.
good.
Get a group of guys together, go for a little road trip, come and join us at the Ark Encounter next year. And then something that we've all been involved in, the ABC curriculum, especially with the Sunday school editions and things, but then later with the homeschool edition. That is now available in all the grades and accessible to everybody. Great resource. So you guys are
That's
working
taken
on
a big chunk of all of our lives.
Yes.
It really has.
That's been over
Brian and I
10
made the
years.
videos for that, which was a
10
big
years
project.
working on that project. So great resource for you. There's a homeschool edition and the Sunday school edition, so you can check those out. Get great resources to equip you, your family, your church family, all those. All right, until we
Awesome.
see you next
Thanks for
time.
joining
Thanks
us.
for joining us.
Take care.